it doesn't matter how much money you make. That money does not equal happiness. There's a Princeton study that says in the United States, if you're a family of four and you make $70,000, you're as happy as Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
And I totally understand that because all I've done for 30 years, on my money side is make other people more money. But what I do now is I sit down with new clients and I say, okay, well, what makes you happy? And how can we get more of that? You see, money is a tool.
Hello, everybody. You're listening to Chatting with Candice. I'm your host, Candice Horvath. Before we get started on this week's episode, I first wanted to give a shout out to Skylar and to RB Jefferson. Thank you both so much for the cups of coffee. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone that's been sharing the podcast. I really couldn't do this without you. So this week, I want to introduce Mike Duffy. Mike Duffy is a happiness expert. Doesn't that sound like an amazing job? So he actually has a financial advising company. He also has a nonprofit organization. He's written a few books that are available for free on Amazon. I'll be sure to link them in the show notes. Please help me welcome Mike Duffy. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I was super excited when you reached out because I've been meaning to cover the topic of happiness for a while. How does someone get into that field? You've been studying happiness for over 30 years, if I'm correct. How does that happen?
Well, sometimes when you are at rock bottom, the only way to go is up, right? So I was 17 years old when I lost the most important woman in the world to me, my beautiful mother. She looked like Sophia Loren. She had the comedy chops of Lucille Ball. Everybody loved her, so much energy. And within 3 months of a cancer diagnosis, she was gone. And, my parents both had a sixth grade education. There wasn't a lot of money in the household for therapy. The budget was zero. So I had to come up with my own program to get happy. So I got a degree in psychology. I read everything I could get my hands on to get out of this terrible depression. And I dedicated my life in a topic that is so important to everyone, how to be happy in life. So that's how it started.
Wow. Yeah, so, I mean, it's been the most popular course at NYU since I can remember, and I think a lot of people were surprised at that, and we were talking a little bit before we recorded that a lot of people consider the subject of happiness like a fluff piece,
Mhm.
and I don't understand how you could be, I guess, just so short-sighted or maybe misguided because it's fundamental to our state of mind, our cognitive decline, our physical abilities, how well we age. We focus so much on going to the gym and making sure that the
Yes.
food that we eat is good for our body. But I'm sure all of the studies show that one of the biggest indicators for physical health is your happiness. So
Yes.
the study that everyone quotes is like that 1938 Harvard study. It's like the longest longitudinal study on happiness. And the main finding of that research was that it's all about relationships. And then you have a really
Yes.
good TED talk on friendships and the importance of that on your happiness. So I wanted to maybe have you elaborate a little bit on that.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on today. I am a big fan of yours, and you should be much bigger. You should be on TV, Candice. You have the talents. You have the right positive energy. You're enthusiastic. You're curious. So I see great things in your future. So
Thank
again, I'm
you.
very grateful to be here.
Thank you.
So you hit on something that I love. It's called the Grant Study. JFK was in the Grant Study. And a couple of things came out of that study. And what they did was this study was launched to see how can somebody live their life successfully throughout time. And they checked in on all of the participants, close to 300, over many, many years. And as you said, the most important thing are the love relationships that you create. And the other thing that they found out, they found, okay, what makes you happy? What is the worst thing that you could do in order to have a successful life? And that was drink alcohol.
Oh, wow.
And I know that over COVID, a lot of people started the habit of drinking, right? That was
Mhm.
kind of the pastime. Now, I have a very powerful story about how 8 years ago I stopped drinking alcohol. So I was working out one day and I was playing music through my iPhone. I had my headphones on. I live about 25 miles south of San Francisco in California. And all of a sudden, my text line starts blowing up. And I have three wonderful sisters, and there's two of them. And they said, Michael, please pray for Carlin Rose. The doctor said we need to take her home to die. Now, a little background. Carlin is 3 years old at the time. She has terminal lung cancer. She has hard lumps in her lungs, and she's been in a coma for 3 months. There is nothing that they can do. And I said, Lord, if you will spare this child her life and spare our family this terrible tragedy, I will give up alcohol for the rest of my life. Now, as we fast forward 8 years, I haven't had a drop of alcohol, and Carlin Rose is cancer free.
Wow.
So, and I can tell you from a life perspective, I'm Irish. My parents are from Dublin, Ireland. This is a part of our culture. This is what we do. Okay, it's true, people. But I can tell you this, it was like a lid was taken off my life. The amount of creativity that will descend upon you, the effort, the 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 unleashing of your potential when you are not doing drugs and alcohol is amazing. I would encourage everybody that can hear the sound of my voice to give up alcohol and drugs for a year. No, well, for a month, and then see what happens. But I guarantee you, it would be positive.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that drugs and alcohol should be used as, like, a tool in your toolkit, right? So, like, used with intention, if that makes sense, so not to drink because you're bored or drink because you're sad or drink to fill time, and the same goes with when it comes to drug use, I guess, specifically talking about, like, cannabis or psychedelics, right? So, psychedelics especially, like, people use them recreationally at parties. I think that if you look far back enough in time, like, those were, like, sacred plants, and they were used with the utmost of detail and attention and purpose, and I think that depending on the setting, you're gonna get a different outcome. So when it comes to creativity, I mean, I think that because of, like, biodiversity, right, everything's gonna affect someone differently. Like, I might be able to eat peanuts, and that's gonna kill somebody else. So just, like, a relatable example. But when it comes to creativity, like, we often know that one of the biggest hindrances of creative expression and, like, having aha moments, and, like, having that artistic touch is your frontal lobe, like, especially as an adult. They say that's why kids can have, like, such colorful imaginative plays because that part of the brain's not done yet. So as that gets developed and as life hits you in the face a bunch of times, it becomes harder and harder to tap into that creative energy, and they say that alcohol can actually kinda, like, buffer that a little bit, so it, like, just turns it down a little bit, and obviously, like, dosing is important, like, you don't wanna go and drink a bottle of tequila, that's not good for anybody, but, like, having a drink or 2 drinks can just, like, turn down the noise just enough to be able to, like, tap into the creative element of your brain and not, the analytical. So, yeah. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
So I get exactly what you're talking about. If you are the type of person that can handle alcohol in moderation, you do you.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, there's so many people that take it to the extreme.
Mhm.
And, alcoholism to marriage is like termites to wood. It just doesn't mix well.
Mhm.
And so, you know, by this time, most folks should know themselves and just do the right thing by yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of that too when it comes to misuse or overuse or, unintentional use comes down to lack of purpose as well, right? Like, you don't have a powerful driving force. So then you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to turn to this thing because it makes me feel good in the moment. With your 30 years of experience, do you have like a special recipe when it comes to sparking a purpose? Is that something that you grow? Is that something that you find? Is that something that you build?
So, what I'm most known for is my happiness formula. And I'm so glad that you struck upon the word purpose because my happiness formula is very, very simple. It's P plus P equals H. Purpose plus progress equals happiness.
Mm,
So there's two kinds of happiness. There's hedonic happiness, which is the happiness you get from imbibing or spending a lot of money on clothes or shopping or whatever. And then there's eudaimonic happiness. Now that's the sustainable happiness, right? And that's the happiness you get from doing good to others.
mhm,
1,000 years ago, St. Augustine said, "It is in giving that we receive,"
mhm,
right? If you've ever bought somebody that you really loved a wonderful present, you get giddy inside. You can't wait for them to open it. Compared to when you receive a present, it doesn't really feel all that good,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
It's quite the opposite. So, what I encourage people is in their words and in their deeds, but especially in their words, because words are free, to be encouraging to other people, to be kind. So, what I did about a decade ago is I said, you know what? P plus P equals H. How can I make this powerful in my life? And what I'd like everybody to do right now is to take out either their phone to write this down or a piece of paper. And what I'd like you to do in one column under purpose, write down the purposes of your life. So for me, my wife woke me up at 4:30 last night in the morning. She says, "You've got to take me to the emergency room," right? And what happened was she's allergic to any kind of products, whether it's nail polish. And we went to a party on Saturday night, and she thought maybe by putting press on nails, it would be different than putting, regular nail polish on. And she woke up last night and her face was so swollen shut, you know. But the thing is that one of the greatest purposes of my life is to be a great husband to my wife,
mm,
right?
mhm,
And then you write down, well, what steps can you take, right? And I would do anything for my wife. I'm very blessed that I found my soulmate. But one of the things that I did was with young kids, I realized a long time ago it was much cheaper to hire a babysitter than it is a divorce attorney, right? So every Saturday night was date night. I
mhm.
love being with my wife, right? And it's very important when you're married to have that alone time.
Oh, yeah.
So well, I used to, because my daughter's 16 now. I had a stable of babysitters. So if one dropped off at the last minute, I would have somebody else to replace, not a problem.
Mhm,
And I would say to Shannon, what movie do you want to go to? What restaurant do you want to go to? You see, when you're in marriage, you become one. And you don't want to hurt the other person, because if you hurt the other person by putting them down, saying things that are negative, you're really hurting yourself. Now, who wants to punch themselves in the face, right? Why would you ever want to hurt yourself? This person has agreed to be with you for the rest of your life. Treat them special, treat them with kindness, right? So that was my first purpose.
mhm.
My second purpose, to be a great father to my two children. And under progress, I wrote, coach them in every sport they ever do. Now, I don't like every sport. I don't like soccer, okay? But there I am running around with a whistle, right? With children in a blob. If you've ever seen a children's soccer game, it's just a blob chasing a ball, right? There is no, you can try to be strategic, it's not going to work, right? But I did it anyway. And then, one of the other things is be a great financial advisor to my clients,
Mhm,
right? And then under progress, make relationships with the greatest thought leaders on Wall Street. So if things come up, you've got somebody to call to get great answers to where to position the portfolios. So all of us have those steps. And Benjamin Franklin said that 1% of the population is successful because only 1% writes down their goals. So write down your goals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what Richard Branson says too. Like it's one of his more popular calls or quotes from one of his conference calls with Tony Robbins. And he was like, the difference between myself as a billionaire and everybody else is that I write down my dreams.
Mhm.
And I mean, there's almost something metaphysical that happens when you bring an idea into like the third dimension by writing it down. And it's going to sound a
Yes.
little esoteric, but I mean, it works for Richard Branson, it works for Benjamin Franklin, so it can work for you too, right? And I mean, journaling in general is just a cathartic practice, so it's a good way to get any of like the thoughts that are ruminating out onto paper, and then it's like you can dump them and leave them there instead of having them follow you throughout the rest of the day.
Candice, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
What is one of your dreams?
One of my dreams. Oh, there's so many. Um, so one of my dreams is that my son can look back at his childhood as like an overall net positive, right? Like I want him to be like, I had a great childhood. I had a great and loving family. Like, that's a huge aspiration of mine. I came from one that was a little bit more uncertain, for a lack of better words, a little bit unpredictable, chaotic, that kind of a thing. So I just want to be steady for him. And I think that that'll help set him up. And it's not to say make life super easy either, because I want him to be able to learn that he's resilient and that he can problem solve on his own and he doesn't need mom and dad for everything. But to just provide like that safe harbor is really, really important for me.
As a parent, that's the best dream that you could have, right? And you know what? As I look into the future, I see your dream coming true. He was blessed with a wonderful mother. And I'm sure as he looks back, he's going to be one of the lucky ones that say, you know what? I had a great childhood.
I really hope so. We're definitely putting in the work. But I mean, he's only a year and a half, so I'm sure there's so much that can happen that we can't even begin to predict.
But with your intention
Absolutely.
of giving him a great childhood, it will happen.
Mhm.
And you know what? I can just tell. I'm a New Yorker. I was born in Brooklyn. I was raised in Queens. I lived on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. We just read people. It's one of our gifts. We have a gift of discernment, right? I can tell you're going to be a great mom.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I grew up in upstate New York actually.
Really? What
Yeah.
part?
Binghamton?
You know what? When I was 10 years old, we went camping in Binghamton, and a local family sold us their 1970 dirt bike to me. And we just met this family, and they said, "Oh, would Michael like to spend a week with us?" And we didn't know these people, and like this is the '70s, and my parents are like, "Sure." They let me with crazy people. I'll never forget. I walked down into their basement, and there was rafters, and it was a sea of cigarette butts. And I turned to my new friend. I said, "What's with the cigarette butts?" He goes, "Oh, my father is a chain smoker and he hides it from my mom. So he comes down here so she doesn't know he's smoking." I go, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense." But I vividly remember Binghamton. What a beautiful little town in upstate New
That
York.
is hysterical. I
Yeah.
couldn't imagine. So funny.
People were nuts. But that was the '70s.
They're
Like
probably
here,
still
look at
nuts
my
there though.
children.
It's that small
What's that?
town vibe. I said I'm sure everyone in Binghamton is still nuts. It's that small town vibe. It just does something to you. It's something in the water, it's the environment. I'm not really sure.
And are you in California?
Mm-mm. I was born in California. So when my parents split, we went back to upstate because that's where her family was. And
Uh-huh.
then I went down south for university because I was like, I'm getting out of here. I need
Uh-huh.
something else, something like bigger, more. I went to South Carolina and now I'm in North Carolina, but I've been in the South for a little over, oh man, like 13 years.
I love the South. My first year of college, I went to Georgia Tech in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
My sister's a double E from Georgia Tech.
Mm-hmm.
And for a couple of years, my youngest sister went to college in Milledgeville, Georgia. So, and my sister Roisin still has a house in right on the coast of Georgia, and a house in Jacksonville that she's developing. So yeah, the South is a lot of fun. Good people.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Everyone's really nice. At first, like the speed really got to me. Even upstate was like faster than that pace. And I was like, no one has anywhere to be ever. And now that I've acclimated, it's like such an appreciation for that.
Uh
Um
huh.
it's a little off topic, but have you ever read the book Einstein's Dreams?
No.
Oh my gosh. So we just started it. My husband and I like read a chapter every night before we go to bed.
Nice.
And it's fiction, but it's written by a physicist, I believe, and it's an interpretation of like what Einstein would have dreamt about on his discovery of time and relativity, and it is just fascinating. So it gives you a lot of different scenarios. Some of them are dark, some of them are light, and then what you come to realize is that like time often is used against us when it was developed for us, and it's how do you use it as a tool instead of having that tool use you, and then use it to be happier, right? Because so much of our happiness is like it's taken away because we feel like there's not enough time and there's so much stress, and this to-do list just keeps growing, and then realizing like everything's a suggestion. Like there's very few things in this world that are just like a hard pressed rule. So if you can manipulate time to suit you, then that's like a really good stepping stone, I think, to having more peace of mind.
You know, Einstein had such amazing quotes. You know, I have a couple of Einstein quotes in one of my books, the Happiness book, which, by the way, is free on Amazon. If you, all five of my books are free on Amazon if you're a Prime member. So, but as you study that man, what a gift! What a gift to the universe that that man was.
Mhm.
So you're reading the right book.
Oh my, I love his quotes. I use them all of the
Yeah,
time. And it's
yeah,
like I wish we learned that side of him a little bit more too in school, like the philosophical side or like the spiritual side, because he definitely seemed to be someone that believed in more.
yeah.
And so are you familiar with Jamie Wheel?
No.
So he works a lot with Stephen Kotler. He's an author. He talks a lot about like flow states, spirituality, philosophy, that kind of stuff. Like he's just kind of an intellect. So he wrote this book. It's his newest one. It's called Recapture the Rapture, and it's on like sex, philosophy, purpose, and he says like a god-shaped hole that we're trying to fill. Like
Mhm.
he's saying that with like the death of religion, the loss of community essentially because we're living like these nomadic lives and everything is digitized, that it's left a god-shaped hole in our heart. So I was curious as far as your take on the role of spirituality when it comes to happiness.
Well, you know, I talk a lot about the science of happiness.
Mhm.
And in all of the data, it shows that the happiest people have faith
Mhm.
and are a part of a spiritual community,
Mhm.
right? So you can't refute the data over and over and over and over again.
Mhm.
You know, one of the other factors is if you work for yourself, you tend to be happier than somebody, you know, so there are indicators. And, you know, I always tell folks it's never too late to get back to God, right? You know, I'm a believer and we are here for a purpose. All of us has a purpose and it's in your heart. So, you know, you had asked me earlier, how does somebody find their purpose?
Mhm.
Just look into your heart. You've been, you know, for a lot of folks, they've been holding down their purpose. They're afraid. They're afraid because if they live in purpose, right, they could fail. Nobody
Mhm.
wants to fail. But I took a continuing education course at Stanford on failure. One of the greatest courses I ever took, right? And the more that you say, you know what, I'm gonna fulfill my purpose and I don't care if I fail, the more wonderful things show up. And you have to understand that we serve a loving God who is for you. right? It's not some old man in the sky is like, you did this, so I'm going to punish you for that. No, all of life is a gift.
Mhm.
Life is beautiful. There was a show back in the late 60s, early 70s. It was called Life is Worth Living. We all of the problems that we have today are not new, right?
Mhm.
Suicide was a problem back then. Disenfranchisement was a problem back then and all throughout. And it was by Archbishop Fulton Sheen, right? And today you would never have a Catholic bishop get his own show, right? And he was the Archbishop of New York. He was such a colorful man. He would wear capes, and he should have been on Broadway, right? But he would speak to people, even people that didn't have faith. He's kind of like the Joel Osteen of today, right? A lot of people who have no faith or are not of the Christian faith love Joel Osteen. Why? Because he's positive.
Mhm.
He doesn't focus on sin. He doesn't focus on what a lot of people associate with faith,
Right.
right? So that's what I like to do in my personal life and in my itinerant preaching, because I do about 3 podcasts a week. I get hired by corporate events, nonprofits. I guest lecture at Stanford University and other universities. This is what gives me joy,
Mhm.
to share that life is beautiful and to share the data on what lives a happy life. And getting back to your point, yes, people that have faith are happier than people who don't.
Have you read the Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop, I think it's Desmond Tutu?
I haven't, but somebody who's really good for your podcast is Barry Shore, the ambassador of joy. Have you met him yet?
No, I'm gonna write that down.
Barry Shore, the ambassador of joy. He is a hoot. So Barry Story is extremely successful diamond merchant, right? Living in Venice, California, goes to bed, wakes up paralyzed, can't move.
Whoa.
And how does somebody who can't move experience joy again? And that's what Barry's mission is. Barry's late 60s, early 70s, the enthusiasm that Barry brings out. And he had to find his way back to mobility. So he swims 2 miles a day. He can walk now. He's got a big, giant Moses staff. And I just love his positivity.
So would you say that there's a difference between happiness and joy?
Yes, I believe that. Now they're very interconnected,
For sure.
right? They're very similar feelings, but I think that joy is more of a fleeting feeling, whereas happiness can be more sustainable, right? I have my own business. It's called Happiness Wealth Management, right? What else would I call it, by the way, right? And and what I do that's different, I was a senior vice president at Merrill Lynch. I had a corner office, top producer. And I just wasn't happy.
Mhm.
Uh, it doesn't matter how much money you make. You that money does not equal happiness. There's a Princeton study that says in the United States, if you're a family of 4 and you make $70,000, you're as happy as Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
And I totally understand that because all I've done for 30 years, on my money side is make other people more money. But what I do now is I sit down with new clients and I say, okay, well, what makes you happy? And how can we get more of that? You see, money is a tool.
Mhm.
And a lot of people don't know how to effectively use that tool for the
Mhm.
greater good.
Mhm.
And not only for the greater good in the community, but for their own happiness.
Mhm.
Let me tell you a story. I had a client who was a billionaire, most miserable person you'd ever meet in your whole life.
Mm.
And he had a hoarding mentality, right? You can't get to $1 billion unless, well, most of the time, unless you're a hoarder. right? More, 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 more. Because life is short to get there that fast. You've really got to get down deep. And he couldn't spend money. I remember he got back from a vacation. I said, "How was your vacation to France?" He goes, "It was great." He goes, "You get great wines in the supermarket for $5." And I said, "Norman, you're 80 years old. It's time to buy the good wine." And I said, "Okay, in terms of estate planning, how are we going to give out this money?" He goes, "Well, I'm going to give it all away when I'm dead." And I said, "Why not give it away when you're alive? So that you can be honored, so that you can see the joy that this money will give to the community,
Mhm.
right? You can see the smiles on the people's faces."
Mhm.
No, no. So that's the difference in what I used to do to what I do today. And we come up with the most tax efficient way to give away your money. And I'm not saying all your money.
Mhm.
We're not talking Gandhi stuff here,
Mhm.
but it's, a small portion of your money so that you can enjoy the gift of giving while you're still alive.
Mhm. Yeah, and pretty much every study also shows very clearly that giving is a huge factor in how much happiness that you have as well. So they call it, this was in the Book of Joy. They call it altruistic giving or altruistic reciprocal altruism. I'm sorry,
Mhm.
and they say that it shows up as early as 6 months. So if you give a bunch of toys to a 6 month old and above, that they'll often opt for the ones that are like helpful because they actually experience happiness and joy from helping out mom and dad. So example, like a lot of little kids once they start walking is they like to clean. So they pretend vacuum and they pretend dust. And that's
Yes.
because well, yes, they see mom and dad doing it, but they also like know it's helpful and it makes
Yeah.
them, it makes them happy. So at the earliest of ages, there's that biological need in us, right? And then we also have this darker side that is like, well, what about me? And it's very, very ego driven. And it's like, again, like you said, that hoarding mentality of more, more, more. So it's like, well, which one is gonna win? And that's
Mhm.
the one that you feed, right? It's the one
Yes.
that you practice. So it's like
Yes.
the smallest opportunities for giving or helping someone else, like start there and then just figure out like how can I scale this is gonna make a huge difference. Um they also call it, the helper's high, which, like, releases
Yes.
endorphins, it's anti-aging, it's
Yes.
so good for you, so it's like if you need anything, money, like you said, to a point in the US, it's about $70,000, isn't gonna really do much, but if you give something, if you give whatever you have, like, whether it's, like, blankets to a dog shelter, you go and you buy a sandwich for someone that's, like, homeless on the corner, something small is just gonna have such an impact on you and your longevity and your state of being. Um, what like something crazy happened somewhat recently. I was driving Whole Foods and there was this homeless man on the corner and there's usually like one or two that are there and you just like see them and it's just is, right? For some reason, I got, like, the number 25 in my head. It just, like, popped in, and I was like, "Well, that's weird. Maybe I'm, like, supposed to get a gift card or something and hand it to them, and then they can go buy some groceries or something." So I'm in line, and this woman was with her probably one-year-old, and they were cashing out, and she was very stressed and feel like frantic and just trying to pay, and I could tell that, she was using an EBT card.
Mhm.
So they go, "Okay, well, that'll be $25." And when I heard that, I perked up because I was like, "Well,
Wow.
this is weird." And she goes, "Well, I just gave you the card." And they're like, "Well, there's a balance of $25." And you could tell like she was searching through her wallet even though she knew there wasn't anything in there. And she looked at the cashier and she's like, "Well, I don't know what to do." And then the cashier was like, "Well, I don't know what to do. Let me see if I can talk to my manager." And I was like, "I'll take it." And they both just looked at me shocked. And I was like, "I'll take it. It's fine. Just like I'll give you my card and whatever." And then she started crying and the cashier got emotional and I was getting emotional and I'm still getting emotional. And this was like a month or so ago. And I was like so fortunate that like that turn of events happened. And it still trips me out because I'm like, I don't know. Like I can't say that's a coincidence, right? But to get back to it, like there's not a lot that I've done for myself that made me as happy as that $25 purchase, right? Like, I mean, I bought myself a horse, and that horse didn't make me as happy as giving the
Fantastic.
$25, you know?
That is fantastic.
So, yeah, I mean, I challenge any of the listeners to do something small because you have no idea how it's gonna make you feel and how it's gonna affect somebody else.
I'm the founder of the Happiness Hall of Fame.
Mhm.
And in the hall is Mother Teresa's Missionaries of Charity. We recognize, celebrate, and encourage people and organizations that make other people happy. It's my 501c3. And I contacted Mother Teresa's Missionaries of Charity in San Francisco, where they have a convent. And I told them that I would like to honor them and have them come out to Stanford University for a big annual gala event. And they said, well, we'll have to check with India. And they called me back and they said, India says it's a go, but we can't come to the event because we can't be photographed. And I said, okay. I said, when would you like me to come up there to give you the award? And so we set up a time and a date. My daughter at the time was 10 years old. And I went up there with the award and a check, and I wanted them to have a really good dessert. I have a sweet tooth, right? It's generational. I love it. Okay, I wish I didn't, but I do. Right? And so I said, I want these wonderful ladies to have a great dessert. And I wanted my daughter to see these amazing women who give their entire lives to the poor, to the unseen. So we go up there, and I found out that I was one of the few men ever allowed into the convent. And I gave the Mother Superior the cupcakes. And she said, oh, thank you, Michael. Our friends on the street will really enjoy these. Now, Candice, there are moments in one's life where just words will change your trajectory. It was in that moment when she said, our friends on the street, I started to see the unseen. I started to see that the people that I've been avoiding are my friends. So that launched my homeless outreach, which gives me some of the greatest joy. And one of my favorite stories from that is that through the outreach, I had been visiting with a young man on the street, my friend Zach, for about 6 months. And he always had a San Francisco Giants hat of some sort, something San Francisco Giants. And Zach was born without the ability to stand up. He's like a modern hunchback. He has to drag himself by the knuckles in order to go forward.
Oh, wow.
And I said, Zach, what are the desires of your heart? What are your dreams? And he said, my greatest dream is to meet the players of my favorite team, the San Francisco Giants. Now, the San Francisco Giants are in the Happiness Hall of Fame. And they had just come out to Stanford and they brought their 3 World Series trophies. And they talked about how they make people happy off the field through community outreach. I'm making a movie. I had already filmed them for the movie. And I called up the front office, which I had made a great relationship with. And I said, there's a friend of mine, Zach. Can you make his dream come true? And they said, Mike, not only will we make his dream come true, we will have you guys come up during our premiere game of the year against our hated rivals, the LA Dodgers, because there's quite a competition between the two cities. And you can take up Zach for batting practice. And I said, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I pick up Zach, put him in my car. We go up to the Giants. They meet us with 2 bags full of swag, hats, scarves, everything. He's just amazing. We set up his wheelchair. I'm wheeling him out onto the field. And he says to me, Mike, this is one of the greatest days of my life. And I said, Zach, this is one of the greatest days of my life, right? So that's how I use the hall. I use it to leverage so I can make people happier, right? Now, how did I come up with the Happiness Hall of Fame? I made it up out of thin air, right? And I've gotten to meet Muhammad Ali. I
That's really
spent a
cool.
couple hours with Muhammad Ali. I have met some of the most amazing people out of complete thin air. So if you're hearing the sound of my voice, whatever your dream is, it can come true if you have a noble intention. So go for it. I was supposed to meet Dr. Wayne Dyer, who had a profound effect on my life. And for those who don't know Wayne, he had 10 PBS specials on self improvement. He wrote 41 books. And I was supposed to meet him in Phoenix, Arizona, and give him the award in person because he was, worldwide. He could never come to the event in Stanford. And so I was so excited to meet, one of my luminaries. And unfortunately, the week before, he died of a heart attack. So he would always say, go for it now. The future is promised to no one.
Mm-hmm.
And that really did, really ameliorate those words in my life that if you have something that's important to you, go for it now.
Mm-hmm. So it's something that we touched on a little earlier. So when you have this moment for both of you, right? You both say like this is one of, if not the greatest moment of my life. How do you sustain that?
Well, you make progress in your purpose. You have to know what your purpose is. We are here for a reason. A lot of my friends on the street are mentally ill.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a different subset. But I'd say about 15% of my friends on the street don't have a purpose and they have allowed themselves to succumb to alcohol and drugs,
Yeah.
right? Why? Because they didn't identify their purpose and they didn't make progress in it. So, how do you sustain happiness? By being a good person, by writing down your goals and going for it, staying on track. That's how you can sustain your happiness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'd like to add like the interconnected element as well, right? So having interpersonal relationships, like having a solid support system. One of the things that I think is a problem with the modern hustle culture that we see, like the millennials and the Gen Z, that they're just soaking it up, right? Like that Gary V culture of work, 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 and then a little bit of you time and a little bit of family time and a little bit of friend time. And I was like, well, what's that going to be for? Because if you're not putting in energy to maintain those other relationships, they're not going to just self sustain most of the time, especially when you're in your 20s or your 30s. And then it probably gets worse as everyone starts having kids because then there's even less time for yourself, let alone other people. So it's like, well, what is it for? Like, is it for a legacy? Because then you have to hope that you found a partner that's willing to deal with your 180-hour work week or whatever the heck some of these people are doing. Um, so I think what we're missing is a sense of balance and not prioritizing those relationships. Um, do you see? So I guess if you just look at the data, I was listening. This was part of that Jamie Wheel book that I just started. They were saying that more people, and we know this hits men worse than it hits women, but more people commit suicide than die from all natural disasters and all like war or military intervention combined. Like that's modern day statistics. So we see this huge spike in this alarming area. We see people that are also trying to work themselves to death. Like in Japanese culture, there's actually a term for working yourself to death because it happens so often.
Mhm.
When are we going to start seeing that conversation shift to prioritizing yourself and your happiness and your relationships, not status and finance, and comparing like who did the most spreadsheets?
Well, I think you're talking to the perfect person because in November I'll be 30 years in finance. And in America, the biggest taboo that we have is telling somebody how much you make. When was the last time you told somebody how much you make? Probably never, right? Uh, And you wouldn't tell your brother, you wouldn't tell your sister. It's seen as bragging, or you're afraid to admit to it, or what your net worth is.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, in what I do for a living, I simply can't work with you unless, right off the bat, I know how much you make and what your net worth is. Could be that's American law. I need to know as a fiduciary, so that way I can make the right recommendations. So once that hurdle is breached, all of a sudden I become a financial therapist to these people. Everything comes out.
Mm.
I know which child they don't like, right? I've heard the most outrageous things over the last 30 years, and I love it. This is where I'm supposed to be, so I can give people wise counsel
Mm-hmm.
in how to live a balanced life, right? So I have all the extremes. I have the trust fund babies. I have the workaholics. And that's why I not only manage the money for these folks so that one day they don't have to work, and what they've saved up can provide them a wonderful retirement and provide a legacy for their children and all of the good things, and to also fulfill their philanthropic needs, but also to map out what are your passions? Why are you spending so much time at work? Since I can see right here, you don't need to. Have you thought about golf? Right? Let me tell you something about golf. I hated golf. If somebody started, because some of my clients golf, but if somebody started to talk about golf, I would feel robbed from having this precious time on earth stolen by hearing about their golf game, right? And then on June 11th of last year, my sister called me up, my sister Roisin, who's just an amazing, loving, she's 100% heart. Thank God she's in my life. And she said, Mike, Daddy's estate, this is the last check from it. My dad passed away a couple of years ago. Amazing man. He loved to golf. One of my favorite lines of his poetry, wrote poetry for 50 years, was love is the center point of living, which how can you argue that? You can't, right? I have $2,800 check that I'm going to send to you, and that'll be the end of the estate. My dad didn't leave much, right? But he left me with love. Oh my God. The memories I have about my dad, he was the Irish Frank Sinatra. And I said, you know what, Roisin? I'm going to do something with that money. I said, I've been seeing on Facebook all my friends around the world that golf. They can golf during COVID, and all they have is big smiles on their face. And they're in groups of people.
Mm-hmm.
Because this was right in the teeth of COVID. I said, I think I'm going to take that money and I'm going to buy a set of golf clubs and golf lessons. And she says, do that, Mike. She goes, Daddy loved to golf. And she goes, it would be such a tribute to him. I said, okay. I locked my front door in my office. I walked out. I got the cheapest set of clubs, $430. And I went to the range and I fumbled around trying to get that ball off the tee. It's almost impossible without lessons. But what I just recently did is I joined a country club here in Millbrae, Green Hills. And on Saturday night, they had a winemaker's dinner. And all of these people were there, and everybody was so happy. And I'm being introduced to a guy who reminded me of Chris Farley was still alive, right? He looked like a walrus with this big gray mustache and a hearty laugh, and a big smile on his face. And I would tell people that to give golf a shot, because I call it social yoga. You're around people, and yet there are moments where you have to have precise body movements where you need to focus, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're out, because I always tell people to go out for a walk. It's one of the greatest walks you can have,
Mm-hmm.
right? In a beautiful park-like setting. So yeah, throw in a little golf, and it can really help you.
My father-in-law is gonna love that little soundbite. So he loves golf. My husband loves golf. It's something that they really bond over every time that he's down visiting. They go to the country club and they golf. And we joke because the youngest member at the club is 2 years old. So his parents don't play, but they bought a sports membership for their 2-year-old because he plays
Nice.
golf, and he has this little caddy bag, and it's like the cutest thing you've ever seen. Um, and like one of the things I don't golf, but one of the things that I appreciate about golf is that it's something that you can play in your later years, and it's something that you
Yes.
can play at the like the sunrise of your years as well. So it's like
Yes.
intergenerational, and you can, when you go to like the 19th hole or whatever, it's like dads and granddads and grandchildren, and they're all golfing together, and it's just like such a bonding experience that everyone can kind of connect with. And there's very few activities that you can say that for, that you can play that long. And there's like a great meditative quality, as I understand as well, like quieting your mind when it comes to actually
Yes.
hitting the ball where you want it to go. So I believe in that. I believe in yoga. I think both of those are great exercises just
Mhm.
for spending time not only with other people but like with yourself, and figuring out like, who is this person? Right? Like,
Mhm.
what is driving that, because to me, happiness is 100% dependent on your lens and like how you choose to show up in the world and
Yes.
how you choose to react with everything. So it's accepting that shit is going to happen, and I'm not always going to be able to do anything about it, but what I can do about it is how I choose to show up and how I choose to react and how I choose to look at this. Like, is this a lesson or is this a failure? Both are the same thing. One is just for me and one is against me, and that's like a huge shift in like just your state and how you see the world, and you're going to see this ripple effect of how it shows up in other areas of your life.
Candice, the world needs you. You have it together, my dear. You are the complete package. And you know what? The shame is that somebody like you doesn't have a show once a week, right? To really, talk about all the beautiful facets of life. You could call that show "Life Is Worth Living" and take on where Archbishop Fulton Sheen, left off. Like, it's a shame that we don't on television. We don't have these positive influences like your show. You go to Netflix, it's just crime, violence. Oh, it's terrible, right? So thank you. I am grateful for the light that you're shining on the world. Keep it
Oh,
going.
well, thank you too. Yeah, it's really interesting. So, I'm sure you're familiar with like the negative bias. Are you
In what way?
so that we, from an evolutionary standpoint, biological standpoint, we are
Yes.
predisposed to pick out the
Yeah.
bad versus the good. It's like
Yeah.
for every 9 to 10 positive things, one thing that's negative will stand out more powerfully than the others combined. And they
Yes.
say it's because, when we were getting chased by lions, tigers, and bears, that this was very important, that those things stood out just for survival. But now our biology hasn't necessarily caught up to this high tech world that we're living in. So that's still there. So that thing that used to be a lion, tiger, or bear is now a bad comment on YouTube, or someone trolling you on Instagram, or it's that crime television. Like, we're just drawn to it. And the powers that be know that this is true, and they kind of, I guess, take advantage in a way. So I think you brought up a really good point when you brought up Netflix. It's so important to be mindful of what you're consuming digitally. And it's so interesting to me that one of the trending topics for podcasts is actually true crime. It's like one of the number one, if not the number one category, especially for women, which is so interesting because we make up 90% of the victims. So it's like, why are you doing that to yourself? Like, you're doing something to your subconscious that I don't think you're fully aware of. You're going to start instilling like this fear and anxiety that you probably don't want to be there, or maybe like this cynical worldview. So I think it's super important to be hyper vigilant about what you consume. When I was pregnant, my husband was hilarious. Like, I would joke, and some people are probably not going to think it's funny, but I would joke that the house turned into like North Korea because he would monitor what I was reading, what I was doing on my phone, what I was watching on TV. He's like, "This will be a zen space for that baby that's in your belly." And like my girlfriend, she loves like horror books,
Uh-huh.
and she had suggested one. He's like, absolutely not. Get this out of the house. So he lives that as well. So I was curious, as someone who's like a happiness expert, do you ever indulge in like crime movies or murder mysteries or anything like that?
No, everything you said is true. Look, our brains are computers. If you're feeding it these true crime things, you're not going to feel safe in your own reality. You won't want to go out at night because everything you're consuming is when you go out at night, people murder you. You're going to look at your husband sideways, like, is this guy trying to murder me? Right? And like, who's that guy? It's funny. Like the guy says, murder. That guy. He shouldn't be on TV. And then what about like, oh, Janice would light up a room. As soon as you heard Janice would light up a room, like, oh, she's getting murdered, right? So then you're like, oh, maybe I should light up rooms. It's terrible. You have to guard your heart.
Uh-huh. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, guard your heart, guard your mind. All of it
Yeah,
is so important. They say that when it comes to like the levels of your consciousness, so your memories, like what you can actively retrieve, is a fraction of the processor that's happening in the subconscious. So it's, even though you might not be able to pull a memory or point at an emotion and say, yeah, I feel that it can be happening on a level that you're unaware of. Um, so it all does kind of matter. Everything is a frequency, everything is energy. And it's like, well, where do you want to be vibrating at? Do you want to be vibrating at murder or
yeah,
murder? Or do you
yeah,
want to be vibrating at like joy, peace, love,
yeah,
happiness, all of those good things?
yeah. Jesus said, "They shall know you by the company that you keep." Right. That also extends to the media that you consume. But if you're hanging out in a bar with alcoholics and barflies, what's going to happen to you?
Yeah.
If you are consuming media that says that you are a victim and it's only a matter of time till you get murdered, what are you going to think, right?
Yeah.
So I love comedies. I love watching sports where the underdog can succeed. Look, I'm a New York Jets fan. If you were to cut me open, I'm 99% scar tissue. Okay. I love the underdog. I like to watch shows where the underdog becomes the victor, right? And those kind of shows, that's why we love watching, you know, fiction, because you can associate with that person that's being held down, and then when they finally rise to the top, you're like, you feel yourself in that role. And
Mm,
what I say to people is, watching movies and all that stuff is fine, but why not be the hero of your own story in reality? How can you rise above your
mhm,
current circumstances? How can you make a difference, not on your television, but out in the real world?
mhm,
Now that COVID hopefully is basically over,
mhm,
how are you going to reset yourself? Who is the person that you've been aching to become going to break out of that cocoon of safety
mhm,
and take a chance? I love Brene Brown, and she studies vulnerability and courage, right? And she says, picture yourself in the arena, right? And think of an MMA fight, right? You have two fighters going at it for life and death. And then in the crowd, half the crowd will be for one person, the other crowd will be for the other person. So there's always boos raining in on those two people. Have you ever watched a fight where they stopped and they turned around and say, please stop booing? You're
mm,
hurting my feelings, right? No, they keep going at it. What I want people to know is that person that you're fighting in the arena is yourself. Put down your dukes. Stop fighting yourself. Ignore the haters. Not everybody is going to agree with what your dreams are. Getting back to what we watch, I love watching Guy Fieri on Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. My mom was a cook, right? My wife and I are both foodies. We love restaurants. And Guy's in the hall. I got to meet him. And it's not just because he's got that show. Unfortunately, in California, we have fire season, and
mhm,
he cooks for a couple of weeks for the first responders. He told me that he does a lot of work for Make-A-Wish, who's in the hall, dying children. And one time I was watching Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives as a family, because it's a great family show. And I turned to my wife and I said, you know what? When we're retired, this is what we'll do. We'll rent a mobile home and we'll go across this big, beautiful country and we'll follow the restaurants that he went to that we found appealing. And it'll be a great, summer vacation or whatever. And she turns to me and she says, well, good luck with that. Right? I'm like, what? Uh, and the thing is, not everybody sees your perspective of dreams. She doesn't want to ever step into a mobile home. That to her is torture, right? But and so don't be afraid of the fact that whatever's in the deep recesses of your heart, when you bring it up, that not everybody's going to be for it. That's okay. That's not their purpose. It's yours.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that comes down to just, like, knowing yourself on an authentic level and, like, what you need and, like you said, not being afraid to kind of go after it. I think one thing that makes it difficult in this age is social media. So we compare a lot or we
Yeah.
see something that works and then we're like, "Okay, well maybe if I just replicate that instead of doing what feels right here, that's going to make me successful and then therefore happy." So it's trying to find I guess like the most authentic path to those things. In that book of joy that you were talking about how envy and loneliness are like two of the biggest players when it comes to unhappiness. So it's realizing that suffering usually has a purpose. You just have to kind of dig to find out what it is. And you can probably do it with both of those negative emotions, if you would, as well. So, are you familiar? There's this study excuse me, there's a study that they did with chimpanzees, and it's kind of on fairness and envy, and it also shows that is just kind of our wiring. So it's like I feel like as human beings we're constantly trying to overcome our biology. Like we have this big beautiful brain and it's like how can we
True.
overcome our more primitive
Yeah.
tendencies? So they had one of the monkeys complete a task, and they gave it a cucumber, and he was like, "Okay, this is great. I got a cucumber." And he watches, and one of the other, I'm sorry, chimpanzees do the same task and get a grape, and he's like, "Oh, cool. I'm gonna get a grape next. Like that's an upgrade." Does the task again, and he gets another cucumber. And he's like, this goes on, and eventually the monkey that was getting the cucumber loses it, and he's like, he goes up in this fit of rage because he's like, this is not as good as that. This is not fair. And in essence, like, it came down to understanding like fairness and envying the grape, envying someone that had something better. Up until he saw that grape, the cucumber was just fine.
Mhm.
And I feel like so much of the time, it's gonna sound hysterical, but so much of the time, we're that monkey with the
Yes.
cucumber on social media. You know what I mean? So it's like, how do we get in a place where we can have gratitude and appreciation instead of just saying, "Well, I want that now."
So first of all, everybody's looking for a quick hack,
Mhm.
right? What's my quick hack, right? And what you said is entirely correct. We have these base instincts for survival that were put into place so that we could survive as a species. And we're always trying to overcome that, right? So, and that's why, when I got my degree in psychology, I have this voracious knowledge for studies just like that. They talk about crabs. Crabs won't let the other crab, as they're trying to get out of the pot, they will grab them and
Oh
pull
my
them back
god.
down. Oh yeah, yeah. So that that's what we're fighting. So one of the things that I tell people to do is before you go to bed, instead of rehashing the day, which is what we do as a species, and we try to fix what went wrong, right? Like, oh, I should have said this, or I should have done this better, whatever. That's a down spiral. You have to make a conscious effort to choose happiness, right? And to choose gratitude. So, what I tell folks is just before you're going off to sleep, Start listing the things that went in your favor, the things that you're grateful for. Maybe it was a salad that was made by somebody that loves you. You know, whenever you have, I mean, this is a platitude that's out there. Salads never taste as good if you make them yourselves. I don't know why that is, but it's the truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was just in Iceland at the top of the world, and we stayed at a guest house. I was with my wife and my two kids and my father-in-law and my sister-in-law. And the guest house wasn't fancy. And the woman, Ellen, that owned it, she was like an aunt that you see in the movies, just nothing but gushing love and positive energy. And I'd say she was about 60 years old. And she was where she needed to be in life. And she made soup for us. That was it. At night, she made meat soup, it was called, right? It was lamb. The deliciousness of this simple soup was, you almost wanted to cry. And she came in and she's like, "What do you think of the meat soup?" I said, "Ellen, I have stayed at some of the finest five-star restaurants, at hotels and restaurants. You have a seven-star resort here with your meat soup because the love that you have put into this is unbelievable." And she baked the bread, sourdough bread in at the top of the world. It was the best, and I live in the sourdough capital of the world, the best sourdough you've ever had because it was made with love. So, just to be grateful for the simple things in life,
Mm.
right? That you have conscious thought, right? Unfortunately, some of my clients have Alzheimer's, right? And I've had them as clients for 20 years, and I've seen the progress go down, right? And but the fact that you have conscious thought, that is something that you can be grateful for.
Mm-hmm. Iceland was one of my favorite vacations I think I've ever taken.
Oh,
I
what do you like about it?
Oh my gosh, when we got there, and we went there in December, so I didn't realize that it was dark most of the time,
Oh my
but it
gosh.
was so cool. I'm actually, like, really glad it worked out that way because to see the sun never actually rise, it just kinda hovers on the horizon and then it goes back down. It's like it's nothing. I'm not gonna do it justice by describing it, but it's just something that you would have to experience, but like seeing the volcanoes and like the beaches that are covered in these pebbles and just like the architecture and everything there. I'm like, I understand why the Vikings showed up and were like, this is the land of the gods because it's magical. There's just an
Unreal.
energy there.
Yeah. It's an unreal place. There we are, uh, and it's 38 degrees at the end of June, right? And we're on a zodiac in the North Atlantic, okay, looking at puffins. And by the way,
Oh,
puffins, did you get to see the
no, they
puffins?
weren't there. I guess they left a couple months before.
They have no right to be flying. It's like the bumblebee. Science doesn't understand how the bumblebee can fly. The puffin has to flap its wings 400 times a minute in order to sustain flight.
Wow.
And it's the craziest, cutest looking bird. And it's just a crazy, crazy place. And one of our cab drivers, I'm in multiple layers, multiple coats, and the sun doesn't go down until 12:30. And the cab driver gets out and he's just wearing a short sleeve shirt. And I said, "Aren't you cold?" He goes, "No, I am 100% Icelander." That would be a good movie, Icelander, right? But the history of that country, and they're all so nice, and the food is great.
I was gonna ask, did you eat so my husband and I were like super foodies as well, and then we also try to eat like the historical food or the food of
Yeah,
the culture when we travel. So we had the rotted shark and then we had
yes.
sheep's head. Did you have either of those?
Okay, so we took a food tour. My wife and I love to travel. Our fondest memories are the food tours. So if you want happiness when you travel, get a guide and go on a food tour. It's the best thing you can do.
Mhm.
So yes, for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, I didn't know this, but one of the oldest living animals is the Greenland shark. It's 400, it can live up to 400 years. And the reason why, it's because it basically pickles itself. And then if you were to eat the Greenland shark, you would die because it's so poisonous. So they ferment it.
Mhm.
So yes, I had the Greenland shark. Not great, but it didn't kill me.
It was an
Uh,
intense experience. I
yeah,
only had the place that we went, they served, the shark in a shot glass, and it was, like, 2 cubes of it, and then they served schnapps on the side.
uh-huh,
So you chase the with the schnapps to help
uh-huh.
get rid of the funk. So I had one of the cubes and I was like, "Whoa, that's interesting and unique and intense. Like 1 cube is good for me." My husband finishes both pieces and he's like, "I think I'm gonna get another order. I wanna experience that again." I was like, "What
Wow,
are you doing?" I mean, he's got, like, some Viking blood in him, so I don't know if that's what it was, but it's like,
could be.
count me out on that one.
Count me out too. It was terrible.
Yeah.
Did you try the preserved codfish that looks like the bottom side of a carpet?
Oh, yeah. We did all of those. I wanted to I was like, "What is it like here?" Like, what was it like when the Vikings had to pickle and ferment
Yeah,
everything?
yeah, yeah. I wish I'd went there as a younger man as well. You know, growing up in New York City, it's a 4 hour flight, right? 4.5 hour flight.
Yeah.
It's the closest part of Europe to America,
Mhm.
with the exception of Greenland. But I've met people from Greenland, and they're like, "Don't go. Like, you don't want to go there." But it's amazing. And another thing that people should do is travel. If
Mhm.
you don't have the money to travel to foreign countries, find a friend who has a car. And America has amazing destinations. There really is no excuse not to travel inside the US
Mhm.
and to go to ports of interest. And, we go to Jazz Fest every year. We'll be going in October. Have you done that yet?
Mm-mm.
That's my gift to you.
Jazz
My
Fest.
my gift to you, and he sounds like an amazing guy, is Jazz Fest. It's 2 weekends. I think the second weekend is October 15th through the 18th. We go with the same group of folks. We get an Airbnb. And, for those who haven't been, it's not just jazz. It's 13 stages of music going off at the same time: hip hop, gospel, a big band, country. So whatever it is that you like, they have it, and you just go from stage to stage. There's the people there are great. Nobody's puking on your shoes. The food of New Orleans, even there, is amazing. It is. If you go, you'll meet other people that have made it a part of their lives, and they wouldn't miss it for the world.
Mhm. Yeah, it goes down back down to what is it? The 5 or 6 basic human needs, and one of them is uncertainty or variety, so being able
Mhm.
to travel it's huge. It's like part of what it is to be a human. And
Yeah,
like you said, I mean, you can get in a car, you can camp,
yeah.
you can go take a hike, find like the closest trail to you, like all of these things I think that we don't find time for. There's that time coming up again, right? Against us, not for us. It's like how do you want to manipulate that tool so that you can have more of that?
Mhm.
And I think that's one of the really cool things that happened with 2019 or I'm sorry, like 2020, 2021. Um, People were forced to realize where they were spending their time and how much of it they were spending. They would be stuck in home with like their wife and their kids and say, "I don't know these people. Who are you? What's your favorite color? I have no idea."
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? So reevaluating that. And then what I think is going to happen, because I don't know what it's like where you're at, but people cannot find staff in North Carolina. Like
Yeah.
every single building says, we're hiring. Their restaurants are doing signing bonuses, which is unheard of because so my husband owns a couple. I mean, the margins in a restaurant are abysmal. So to offer
Yeah.
signing bonuses is pretty nuanced.
Yeah.
Um, I think a lot of people are going to redefine what they're worth, what they
Yeah,
want to do, possibly do like a lot of gig work. So, like freelancing and not be beholden to a typical boss, if you would.
yeah.
I'm curious if with your clients on like the financial side, have you seen a shift in people's careers or like where they're spending their time, like post COVID?
Not yet, not yet. But with the little amount of time that we have left, what I'd like to say to folks is to choose yourself. Now is the time. You've had a year and a half of self reflection. Give it a shot this time, right? Choose yourself. If you have an idea to start a business, start it. And if it doesn't work, you know what? Sometimes you win and sometimes you learn.
Mhm.
You'll be enriched in your failure. So the next endeavor that you start up, you'll know what accounting is. You'll know what business insurance is. You'll know all of these things you didn't know before,
Mhm.
right? So choose yourself now because time's running out.
Mhm. Well, before we wrap this baby up, do you want to tell everyone where they can follow you, how they can support you, and any projects that you might be working on?
Sure. So if you want a professional speaker at your event as a keynote speaker or breakout groups, go to MikeDuffySpeaks.com. If you want to watch some great videos that we captured at Stanford University on inductees to the Happiness Hall of Fame, go to happinesshalloffame.com. And if you want to have a financial planner that's going to focus on your happiness as well as your money, go to happinesswealthmanagement.com.
Well, great stuff. Honestly, if anyone was to specialize or spend over 30 years in happiness, would imagine that they were you. Like you were made to do what you're doing. I feel like you just exude light and happiness, and it was so wonderful getting to know you.
Candice, you are a joy. I wish you all the best of success, but I know you don't even need it. I see wonderful things in your future. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Before we wrap up this week's episode, I want to thank you for sharing this with a bunch of your friends. If you enjoyed this episode and if you know anyone that would also enjoy this content, please share it with them. It is the number one way for me to help grow this podcast and have it turn out to be a success. So if you did enjoy it, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Share my YouTube channel, share the podcast with a bunch of friends, and if you're feeling very generous, you can go to chattingwithcandice.com. From there, you can either click that little link that says Buy Me Coffee. That helps me out a ton. All of the proceeds go directly back into the podcast to help improve the quality of the content as well as buy some ad space. And I'm actually going to be leaving Patreon, so you can now find me at candice.locals.com. It's very similar. One of the big things that's different with locals is that it's uncensored. And then I'm posting a lot of bonus content that you can only see on locals. And we're going to start doing some member Zooms. Doesn't that sound super fun? So you get to Zoom with me and my subscribers. Think of it as like a fireside chat. We can delve into some podcast topics and just get to know one another. It'll be fun. So I hope to see you on locals. And thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.